Good afternoon. I'm excited to welcome you all to our conversation on the future of work for frontline workers, which we think is a particularly important conversation this time. I'm pleased to be accompanied by a great panel of four leading thinkers and doers in this space. By way of introduction, Gayatri Agnew is the Senior Director for Opportunity for Walmart.org. She's a leader in corporate and social impact strategy, looking at human capital trends and the future of work. Gayatri serves on the leadership team of Walmart's Global Responsibility Division, where she leads strategy and partnerships for Walmart's efforts on economic mobility, specifically a shared value approach to human capital, partnerships, and philanthropy based on key issues such as employer practices change, improving work-based learning, and strengthening inclusion in communities. Welcome, Gayatri. Bryan Napack is President and CEO of Wiley, a global research and education company and one of the world's leading publishers. With over 30 years in the edtech sector, Bryan currently serves on the board of 0 to 3, a science-based early childhood advocacy organization, and has served on numerous boards, including those of Blackboard, Houghton Mifflin, Harcourt, Burning Glass, Ascend Learning, among others. Prior to Wiley, Bryan served as president of Macmillan in the US. He founded and served as CEO of ThinkBox, an educational software company focused on the early childhood education market, and just this week was named chairman of the board of the American Association of Publishers. Welcome, Bryan.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Chris Layden is Senior Vice President of Manpower North America, part of Manpower Group, the leading global workforce solutions company. Previously, Chris served as Vice President for New Ventures for Manpower Group North America and Managing Director of Experis, Manpower Group's professional resourcing and project-based solutions business specializing in IT, finance, and engineering. Among other endeavors, Chris serves on the Workforce Advisory Council for the Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute based in Chicago. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks. Good to be here.
And Ton-Quinlivan is a nationally recognized thought leader in workforce development. She has a proven record for guiding and implementing large system change while fostering a culture of experimentation, innovation, and collaboration. Her career spans the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Currently, she is CEO of Futuro Health, which was established through a $130 million commitment made by Kaiser Permanente and SCIU United Healthcare Workers to address the shortage of healthcare workers in the nation, starting with California. Vaughn previously served as the Executive Vice Chancellor for the California Community Colleges, the nation's largest system of higher education, and grew public investment in workforce programs to over $1 billion during her tenure. Welcome, Vaughn.
Bryan.
So it's great to have all of you here. And one of the questions I thought we would start with is automation, AI, business model changes are disproportionately impacting frontline workers with lower educational attainment, and COVID is accelerating the trends. That said, we are seeing growth in some areas of the frontline workforce, whether it's healthcare, IT, skilled trades, with a corresponding increase in learning needs. Be interested to hear what you're seeing, and maybe Chris, if we could start with you.
Yeah, happy to, Bryan. In the past 6 months, we have seen, the most significant workforce shift in our 70-year history. And as we kind of step back, we know we're in the emergence of what we're looking at as a two-speed recovery. We have some industries, as you indicated, bouncing back fast, while others are going to have a much longer impact. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about skills that are emerging as we think about this demand more long term. But I maybe wanted to just set this up in 3 growth areas, 3 buckets. Jobs that are moving things, transforming businesses, and the third, helping people. So first on moving things, you hinted at a couple of these, warehouse workers, drivers, logistics, all supporting this rapid growth in e-commerce. The second big area, transforming business, any role associated with our fast shift to online. And, we know app developers, roles in cybersecurity, programmers, and then all of those front-end roles, those specialists in sales and marketing, doing conversions, everything that's helping businesses rapidly rethink how they deliver new value to clients and consumers. And this is happening everywhere, from your local coffee shop to your grocer. Small businesses need to go online, creating jobs on the front end of those, and obviously on the back end as we think about those types of IT shifts. And then finally, helping people, everything in healthcare, lab technicians, nurses, all roles that we know have already been in demand and are getting squeezed again with the increased stress on our healthcare system. But as we kind of step back and just think, not just around the growth of these category of roles, but also around worker preferences, I think that's another big factor here as we think about the impact on frontline workers. Not surprisingly, in research we just updated a few weeks ago across 8 countries, health and safety continue to be number one. But some new trends that I maybe wanted to pull through as we set up today's discussion. The first, people wanting to work their way, workers wanting autonomy, they want their personalized version of a hybrid workplace. And we know that for most people, this means the opportunity to work remotely, but not all the time. And that is a luxury that most frontline workers don't have. And so as we think about the shift of this, whether the shift will be the third shift is the new first shift, stacking of shifts, 3 and 4 day work week shifts, and the emergence even of shorter shifts to accommodate people who want more flexibility in frontline roles. Really, though, the troubling thing I think for us, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about it, is that white collar roles should really not be the only roles where work-life privilege exists. And as we talk to workers in IT and in financial services, they're very clear in terms of their expectations and that flexibility. But when we talk to workers in manufacturing or retail, some of those preferences are not. So an opportunity for us. The second is learning on demand, just more and more opportunities to learn virtually and develop skills to stay employable. We saw this in our own business with hundreds of thousands of workers impacted. And yet, as workers were impacted in frontline roles, the attendance, the engagement within our acceleration programs, our training programs, none of that stopped. People wanted to continue to learn despite being out of work. And then finally, one life, a focus on a blended work for family in the long term. And really just an appreciation now for employers as they think about preferences that 1 in 3 workers is a parent. And we're all dealing with new priorities as we think about the blending of our caring responsibilities. And this is certainly showing up with worker preferences across those 3 categories of role. So hopefully that helps set the stage a little bit for us, Brian. I'm looking forward to my colleagues here to talk a little bit more about what they're seeing.
Absolutely. And when you talk about moving things, transforming, and a move into healthcare, all of that sounds like Walmart. So Gayatri, what are you seeing, both from within Walmart and in the broader ecosystem? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. Thanks for that. And everything Chris said, I was vigorously taking notes as you were going through, because the trends you're describing are coming to life within our business. So I'll just cover off on a couple of things. So one, and everyone knows this because we are all consumers, but the pace of change, including the pace of changing behavior by the consumer, has been rapidly accelerated over the course of the last 6 months. And when you think about that experience for a customer, in order for us to provide that experience to the customer, we have to also be changing the learning experience and the upskilling efficiency almost of the workforce that is ultimately quite literally delivering that service or product to a customer. And so we've just seen a ton of shifting, right? And so with customers not coming as much physically into stores, but ordering online, picking up in the parking lot, you're literally moving jobs from what used to be at the cash register into a combination of the back room, but also into personal shopping. So that's an example of a category that's just skyrocketed for us. And if you think about the skills you use as a customer greeter or the skills you use as a cashier, they're actually very different than the skills you would use as a personal shopper or as a grocery delivery specialist, right? It's a very different function of both competencies. It's a different level of engagement with technology. And it's actually just an entirely different day for the worker, including potentially, Chris, to your point about shifts and schedules, potentially also different hours, right? So I think what we're seeing, the largest sort of trend is just pace of change and the impact that pace of change has on our workforce. And so we've tried to make an enormous amount of intentional accommodation around that. I also think what we're seeing is this bifurcation of how people work, right? So I work in Walmart home office. I've been working from home since the pandemic began, but our store associates are still on the front line serving customers every day. And so within our own company, we are seeing that bifurcation of the workforce and really thinking through how do we not just support the health and safety of our frontline associates, but the continued career growth and ongoing development of our frontline associates. So, I think there is so much to say about this topic, but pace of growth and sort of importance for those of us who have a workforce that is physically still needing to show up at work, the implications that has for how you manage your workforce, support your workforce, and upskill your workforce, I would say would be the two biggest trends.
Vaughn, what are you seeing?
Well, I'm going to echo this theme of the rate of change. When I was at the California community colleges, one of our big mantra was, hey, our workforce programs, we need to keep up with the speed of business, Well, with this pandemic, actually, now we have to actually keep up with the speed of need, because that's even faster than the speed of business right now. So imagine, even for the frontline workers in healthcare, where you don't think the skill sets would change very much, it was a very dramatic shift where healthcare was, maybe you had less than between 10 to 20% telehealth at most. At this moment in time, Kaiser Permanente is having over 90% of its appointments in telehealth form. So if you dive into the skill set for a moment, think about what is the difference between the medical assistant who used to check you in and take your vitals and get you ready for that appointment versus one that has to do it in virtual rooming. So it's not just the compassion and empathy that is typical of healthcare workers who want to go into this field, but now you have an overlay of having to demonstrate those skills through a virtual format. And apparently, for example, you'll hear doctors say that right at the moment when the doctor is exiting the patient room, that's when the patient actually says, excuse me, I have another issue I want to talk to you. So now you're removing a lot of those physical cues, and there will be different norms in the virtual rooming. And then the third, which is the most obvious, is that now all of a sudden you have to do tech support. That wasn't needed before, right? So the individual on the other side has to have their data downloaded, all their devices ready for that medical appointment. And so now you have a very different combination of skills than before. So very interesting things happening on the front line in order to really just keep up with the speed of need, which is quite demanding.
Yep, that theme of the pace of change, the speed of need, the businesses transforming, requiring how work is delivered transforming, requiring a change in skills is, certainly something that's, in common across what all of you have said, and certainly what we're seeing more broadly. Bryan, what are you seeing?
Well, all these comments are so apropos of what we're seeing. I would sum up what we are seeing in the market as under three words. I would say acceleration, urgency, and for me, optimism, which is an odd thing to say right now, I think, given all that's going on. But we sit at Wiley, we sit at the sort of at the center of the ecosystem. We have a bit of a unique vantage point. We serve virtually every university in the world in one form or fashion, and now we're one of the world's leading world's leading advisors to universities on how to adapt to succeed in a more digital world and a world that's more outcome oriented and the like. But we're also one of the world's leading partners with corporations to help them figure out how to acquire, skill, upskill, reskill, adapt, all these things. And so as we look across our universe, what we're seeing is, to be sure, an acceleration of all the trends that have been going on and were going on before COVID. The focus on real outcomes, the focus on providing the skills that will allow workers to succeed in the long run. the focus on return on investment in education, and many more, right? Just the move to digital. And as we look out, what we're seeing is almost all the trends that we had, in fact, built our entire company on and strategy on have accelerated. So university presidents are trying to solve this very problem that we're looking at now. We can't ignore the universities. Corporations are trying to solve it. And the workers themselves, and that theme's coming through everyone's comments here, the workers themselves are trying to solve these problems that we are now confronted with because of the acceleration. And so when you look across our platforms, whether it's cross-knowledge or corporate learning platform, or M3, where we're training people to go right into jobs and finding them, giving them those jobs, or in the university ecosystem, we're seeing a massive increase in demand. Not just from the corporations saying to us, oh boy, we actually need to do this now. We can't wait any longer. We have to get the skills in the hands of these workers. And so therefore, come work with us. But we're actually seeing the demand in the systems themselves. We're at peak capacity in virtually every digital system we have. Not just because people are going to home, and I'm not sure who mentioned it earlier, but the workers themselves, irrespective of the situation they're in, have a hunger for learning now because they know that they need a new set of skills in order to succeed, whether they're out of work or in work. The volume is increasing. And we're seeing that in the university ecosystem as well. The volume of applications to degree programs that we are handling that are promising entry into careers that can provide long-term promise are increasing dramatically, as are our enrollment statistics. So what we're seeing is an acceleration and an urgency surrounding that. Right now, it's not just the trends. Now, oh my God, we got to solve it. But in that elevated interest level, in the elevated hunger, and in the usage, I see optimism. Because what I'm seeing is we're actually, for the first time, grappling with some of these darn issues that we've been talking about for 20 years. And so we're seeing ourselves forced to move past the inflection point toward providing education that meets learners where they are, in all senses of it, not just where they are. We've always in education talked about meeting them where they are emotionally, or meeting them where they are cognitively, but meeting where they are physically, and helping them from wherever they are to see that future point where they want to be, helping them to figure that out, and then helping to pathway them to success. That's what they want. It's what their employers want. It's what universities want to help them do. And that's what we view that we're in the business of doing. So we view that we're really well positioned right now.
No, thank you, Bryan. And that's actually a perfect lead in to an audience poll we have. So if we cue the poll, as we're thinking about this being a tipping point and moving forward, and the amount of innovation that is currently in the market, looking at advancing frontline opportunity, what do you see as the most important innovation for advancing frontline opportunity in the next 5 years? So we'll cue the poll and give you 30 seconds to respond, and we'll have a little bit of discussion based on the responses.
Bryan, as we're waiting on that poll, just the way you asked that question really strikes me, because I feel like you have to add a "for whom" on the end of that, because not all frontline workers look the same, not all frontline workers are the same, nor do they have the same backgrounds or come from the same kind of lived experience. And so I'm very curious to see what the poll tells us and what the audience thinks, but I also think it's an interesting way to introduce the idea of equity, because I think it depends on who's asking and what outcomes they're looking for. And we've really been taking a critical look at both, the composition of our workforce, the progression of our workers through our workforce, with an eye to equitable employment outcomes, which are very different than just looking to strong business performance. While those two things tend to be, and we assume will be correlated, you're not looking at the same metrics, right? And so for whom are we looking for those pathways to be created?
Yep, I think that's an excellent question. And Vaughn, maybe as we're waiting for the poll to come back, I know you've had experience with looking at lots of different folks who are looking at coming into allied health with different needs and different pieces. How have you thought about addressing kind of the different needs that are walking in your door as you're preparing folks for careers in allied health?
Well, we had the benefit of McKinsey's help in looking at the gap in California alone. There's a need for 500,000 allied health workers. And usually the allied health workers are trained through more than a high school degree, but less than a bachelor's degree. And so we were able to prioritize, there's 10 job classifications that comprise that 500,000. And so we were able to go from the largest volume to the smaller volumes as one way of looking at it. And then having conversations with employers to see, to get more of a forward-looking view. I would love for you, Bryan, to share some of the McKinsey findings around gateway jobs. Some of these gateway jobs are very common across industry, and the same gateway job, for example, that is the end user computer help desk support. That is a job that is not only in other industries, but is also in the healthcare industry and is one of the gateway jobs that we're focusing on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of gateway jobs is that some jobs as a frontline worker are real career ladders, where as you move from that job to the next job, so whether you are, if you move from a frontline retail sales associate and move from that to using those skills, that can convert to a gateway job that maybe is somebody that is answering tech related questions, but still with a customer service facing role. That can then translate to somebody who can build additional tech skills and is really on the way to a good mid to higher wage job. And so there are some of these jobs that are real, career ladders. There are others that are step ladders, others that don't have as clear a progression. And so I think one of the things that we're finding interesting and are really excited in exploring more is how can we create more transparency around where are the career ladders versus the step ladders? And for the folks that are on the step ladders, how do we help them think about what the next transition is? If you're not in a role that naturally is a gateway job, well, how do we get you in one that is? And I think that's some of the exciting things that we're thinking about. So we've got the poll results back. So let me share with you what the responses were. So again, the question was, what do you see as the most important innovation for advancing frontline opportunity in the next 5 years? The top choice was, with a quarter of the respondents, stackable credentials, which give credit for skills, whether obtained in school or on the job. Followed shortly behind with employer-sponsored learning programs. So the top one is 25%, the next one is 23%, and then the next two highest were 19% talking about innovative learning technologies and experiences, those that are adaptive to the learner, leverage simulations, leverage just-in-time learning, and then 17% talked about learner supports and financing to help learners persist and progress. So we did have a mix here of things that might be, part of the infrastructure of the learning system, if we think about that as stackable credentials and learner supports, and also a little bit of who's doing the funding and sponsoring in what context, and a little bit of the technologies itself. So I'd be interested to say, is that mix of things, what you see as important? Does kind of what the audience voted on across here kind of resonate with you?
It certainly resonates with me. We basically have a situation where all of these things are figuring out how to meet the employee or the learner where they are and help them to pathway themselves to success. The notion of that is a fool's game if we don't have some notion of an indicia of an endorsement of a skill set that you need in order to get through that. The idea of putting support around that learner, including helping them to understand and helping others to understand what skills they have, what skills they need, is a major would be a major advance. So I think that it all meets very much with our point of view, which is that it's about the learner, meeting them where they are and helping to move them along, including who's going to fund it, how are they going to be exposed to these things, and how is it going to connect to the job that they have to do, either in advance of that job or in the moment when they need to achieve that skill and gain, think of it as a just-in-time skill.
I'll just chime in from a Walmart perspective. One of the ways that we're thinking about learning in the context of both our own workforce, but also its application to the sort of social value of having the capacity to upskill a broader swath of the workforce, is how do you enable the system to distribute the risk more? Meaning, sort of old model is I learn or pay for my learning and benefit from my learning. New model is how do you distribute that risk so I don't necessarily have to shoulder the burden of the cost of the learning, but then also how do you share the benefit? And so I think everything we're looking at, both on our formal US business side in Walmart and at Sam's Club, and then through walmart.org, which is the program that I lead, is looking to how do you distribute the risk so it's not falling all to the burden of the individual, and how do you share the benefit? And I think a couple of key components of that, I love that stackability surfaced, and particularly that the idea that where you learned a skill is less important than that you can prove that you have the skill. And so we've really been thinking a lot about, the skills learned at work, not necessarily validated in formal learning, but potentially validated at work, right? Your record on diffusing tense customer situations, your track record or performance with your own team in terms of leading and managing on the front line. These are really important skills that are transferable to other roles that are often learned in service sector and retail roles like those at Walmart, but typically aren't credentialed or badged for portability in any way. And so part of that shared benefit is to be able to empower our workers to take the skills they've learned while working at a Walmart or another retailer or service sector role and port those skills elsewhere as seamlessly as possible. So I was pleased to see that sort of skills learned at work popped in the survey.
Well, I certainly agree with the stackable credential, and I'd like to give a plug for the financing portion, which is sort of saying what Gayatri just said, but maybe in a slightly different way. So, we have a model in this country where higher education, for example, is viewed as a one-time inoculation. You kind of get the highest that you can early in life, and it's supposedly good for you for the rest of your life. But the truth is that it's really not only the one-time inoculation, but a set of booster shots throughout, right? So lots of booster shots of skills. Then the question becomes, well, who pays? Because if you really look at all of our public policies, in the beginning of your life, you have a lot of public funding in the form of financial aid, for example, right? And a lot of subsidies. And then comes the employer pays, and a tuition disbursement program, for example, where the funds are floated upfront are much more helpful to employees because it helps with their cash flow. So those are excellent programs as well as on-the-job training. But then we have to ask the question, well, our tenure with any employer is getting shorter and shorter. Department of Labor says it's like 5 years or less. And if you're working in the gig economy, it's fractional time of that. So if you're not with an employer, if you're not associated with an employer long enough, how do you have the employer invest in you in a way that it's portable? So there are analogies where, for example, we're saving for our retirement. And every employer we work with contributes to our 501k, right? 401k. So is there a way to do a 529C, a continuous learning account where employers contribute, but we're not with one employer at any one time? So I think this is a fertile area for experimentation, and we need to figure out ways to lower the friction of people not only getting their upfront inoculation, but all those booster shots throughout life, because somebody has to pay. And as Gayatri is saying, we need to figure out how to spread risk and financing.
Chris, one of the things I'd like to get your thoughts on here, I mean, Manpower has been doing some cool things as, with your contingent workforce. As Vaughn's talking about, employers are investing, but the time's getting shorter and shorter. You all are doing some interesting things, with the contingent workforce. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how you're thinking about?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for us, it's a little infrastructure and a little funding. I mean, upscaling at speed and scale is really the key imperative for us. And I think the responsibility as employers to address. And, in our own business, we have a program called My Path. It's a global program all around, getting people their first job, giving them the right type of assessment to help them understand their skills, giving them coaching. And then, really for us, and I think the future of our business is all going to be around how do we help match then to people's potential, not just based on the skills. And, just to kind of build on what we were talking about, whether it's this booster shot or stackable credentials, it will matter less and less because people are not at one job for a long period of time. And for us, it's people taking job to job to job, but we can still help them get ahead. We can still help them gain new skills, but we have to understand potential. And so I think the advances in neuroscience and in assessment overall are helping us with that. A huge area of focus for us because, if you look at, roles like a, bank teller role or an assembly line worker role, front end production role, these are jobs that are declining in their overall demand. And yet, that experience, should be relevant to more than that function in that role. And so, that's the space that we play in. We need to bridge people, into new roles as they gain those skills. And I do think that is the big challenge we're trying to solve.
One of the things we haven't talked as much about here, but we all know is important, is the role of soft skills, particularly as the more routine work gets automated, what's left is more human. And so, I'd love to get your perspective on where you're seeing innovation in soft skills, and maybe, Vaughn, if you could kick us off.
Well, absolutely. Human touch skills are extremely important in healthcare. And I believe Strata calls them sort of human plus skills. So they come by many names: essential skills, power skills, etc. For us, what we have heard from employers, especially the small and medium employers, is that even when they come out with from a technical credentialing program, they're uneven. The graduates are uneven with regards to these soft skills. So we're actually having to double down in this area, do a lot of investments to create immersive experiences, somewhat like the investments of Walmart, for example, and around skill sets like empathy and compassion, cultural competence. So, for example, like how do you, if you're in a difficult situation, a difficult dynamic with a patient, how is it that you're going to be able to elicit the answers to these medical questions, right, in a culturally competent way? Effective communication, working with the care team. So a lot of these are very transferable skills, and we're going to just need to be better at them because they will change at a less rapid rate of change than the technical skills.
I'll add on to that just a little bit because you mentioned the Walmart program. So over the course of the last 3 years, Walmart has stood up and built 200 Walmart academies, which are co-located learning facilities, also sort of known as schools, co-located with our stores across the United States. And in all of those academies, we utilize virtual reality training for a number of our modules. And disproportionately, the virtual reality training is about not what do you know, but how do you feel and how do you react and how do you build that muscle, for example, of empathy. And so just give a quick example of a module is a cashier watching people go through their checkout line. And when you're in the virtual reality, you're seeing the backstory of what may be going on with that individual customer, right? So you see women come up and you sort of get this whole backstory on what's happening with her kids at home. And so the aim is to try to give our customer facing roles like our cashiers that higher level of empathy to say like, yeah, this woman may not be smiling at me as I check her out, but these are the things she's dealing with outside of the store. And it's actually been incredibly effective. And I think really both has built the company's broader empathy muscle as we built that empathy muscle within our own workforce and our associates, because that is the future of our business, right? To serve customers is to be able to move into the tech realm and to automate a number of things for which you don't need uniquely human skills to do, but showing compassion to a customer is definitely one of those things which will remain part of our character.
There's little question that there's been an awakening across the education ecosystem about the importance of what we're calling here the soft skills. And we talked earlier about the proclivity of the ecosystem to train you for the next job, the first job, and hope that lasts for you. But these are, of course, the skills that last for you. These are the ones that power an entire career, that allow you to advance from one job to the next job up, and also from one role to the next role across that maybe has a different set of hard skills. And so we are seeing an awakening about this, and we must focus on it. And I believe that partnership is key to getting this done. It's one of the reasons why we joined the Digital Us Coalition, and we've done this in other parts of the world, where we're trying to tie two of our conversations together, develop a common lexicon for what these skills are. So working with employers, working with schools, working with universities, working with policy, and effectively defining a lexicon that will allow us to define those skills, assess those skills, and ultimately see them in a credential or without a credential, but to see them so that we can take a person that was succeeding in one position, that position declined or was eliminated, and now we can easily move them into another one and allow them to continue along. But the good news is, again, back to my optimism, this is what I'm seeing in our corporate clients. This is what I'm seeing in our university partners. This is what I'm seeing throughout. We're trying to build these things in. The problem is, of course, the system isn't designed to do this. It's easy to assess a hard skill. It's hard to assess a soft skill. We are built around creating computer science degrees. We're not built around creating soft skill degrees. Wiley, as one of the world's leading trainers in soft skills, knows that it's important, and we make a good business in it, but it hasn't historically been embedded into the curriculum. There's no funding stream for it in K-12 education. There's no department for it in higher education. And there's no, there's no sort of common understanding of how this plays out. So to the extent that we can, through partnership, get together with leading employers about what they need and about how to define them, then we as providers, we meaning Wiley and companies like us, universities, and ultimately L&D departments, can start to focus on that. And as we look into our corporate client base, what we are being asked for through, say, our cross-knowledge platform, we're being asked for the soft skills. That's what we're being hired for. They want to see the hard skills because those are the moments of urgency. They got an open job, or they have a person they have to reskill. So they need the hard skills. But what we're being hired for is our ability to deliver the soft skills so that the learner can gather those through the course of their career and become an ever more powerful career journeyer.
So Bryan, I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned there. And we've got about 5 minutes left, so I think it's a good one to end on, because I think it is one that we all think is important. And that's the idea of partnerships, which have been important for a long time. But in the path to opportunity, frame of partnerships, a lot of that was thought, hey, this is the local community college employer partnerships. But now those are still important, but now we're seeing many, many different types of partnerships. And I'd love to get, your perspective on how you see the partnership landscape changing and evolving.
I can jump in on this one, Bryan. I think that we have created an enormous number of silos, some real, some artificial. I'll give one quick example. I think for a company like Walmart with 1.4 million US workers, the most critical partnership is the partnership we have with our people, with our own associates, and how we're able to hear and receive their feedback to understand what they want and need when it comes to their own career growth, development, and learning. But in order to actualize that, we need a network of learning partners capable of delivering at scale to 1.4 million workers, right? And so I think we've had to both create new and innovative partnerships with basically every kind of entity. We have a robust partnership with Guild Education that powers our Live Better You program that now has hundreds of different learning pathways on it, but a ton of different providers behind that. And so the theme I'm seeing in partnership is partnerships that break down silos and create partnerships you may not have expected to see that are ultimately focused on delivering for the learner.
So our approach to partnership is more of building an ecosystem, right? I mean, we look at the labor market need, then we go out and say, which higher education partner has the best-in-class program? Who has the best-in-class program for student support? And then we couple them together. Think of them as Lego sets. So different partners coming together in order to deliver on the student journey. And how we tie them all together is we have a robust data infrastructure so that all of us can have a view into how the student is moving along and have insights into our respective metrics. So I think one of the key things is not only the ability to partner, but having the data infrastructure that can plug and play with other partners is going to be very important.
And I think that pulls together, I think, a number of the themes that we've talked about today. We started off with Chris talking about the pace of change and the speed of need that we're seeing as customers are changing and then workers are changing in terms of what they need to be successful. Then we talked quite a bit about infrastructure that we need, the different types of infrastructure, whether it's stackable credentials or whether it's the employer programs and supports, other kinds of infrastructure that can help learners progress in this and be successful in the career ladders. Finally, we talked about partnerships, and this is the theme here of, as we build that infrastructure, as we meet the need, no one organization can do it on their own. And there are a number of really interesting organizations that are helping to connect, break down silos, and make it so that we can, really deliver something that is integrated, that creates value for, and ultimately career progression for the front line. So thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and look forward to hopefully having the opportunity to continue the conversation with you and with the broader audience. So thanks again.
Thanks, Bryan.